So, welcome to another episode of the Leader on the Couch podcast, which is just reminding you available on video and audio version, depends on what you prefer. Leader on the Couch is where leadership meets psychology through real people, and it's not just theory. So in every episode, we sit down with leaders from around the world and try to dive deeply into their own challenges, lessons learned, and what truly makes them tick. So through candid conversations, we try to uncover the human side of leadership, their mindset, their struggles, their breakthroughs, and everything else. So today we have yet another amazing guest. He's usually the one grilling me with his questions, so I'm truly honored that this time I have the honor to grill him. So I would like to say a very, very warm welcome to John Williams, the CEO of the Institute of Leadership. He has had a varied career in the public sector, private sector, NGOs as well, in many countries. So John, welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, Maria. It's an absolute delight to be here. I hope we'll see how the conversation goes. Yeah, I'm really, really pleased to have this opportunity to chat.
Of course, absolutely. So can you say a little bit about you, if that's okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And a sort of very quick potted history. My career has been a long one. Because I'm very old now, you see. So, and I started off, well, as many people did actually. I like working on a building site, carrying hordes of bricks up a ladder, and for people because we didn't have much in the way of health and safety in those days and things like that. Moving on to glazing windows, and then I got a job early. I suppose quite about the age of 20 in a stockbroker's office. That was the first job I had with a suit on. And it was quite transformational because it showed me for the first time how a service business works and how an office works as opposed to a building site or something like that. And then I went from there. I did a number of positions in various companies in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, lived in Hong Kong for a while. And then when I came back to the UK, I moved from civil servant to consultant to doing foreign direct investment, banking, and eventually landed in membership bodies. And I've been in membership bodies for most of the last decade, I think, really. Actually more than that, probably about 12 or 13 years. And all the way through that, there's been a sort of thread of developing people, because I've always been interested, obviously, in people and how they think and how they work and what helps them to actually be successful in what they do. And as I went through my career, I was fortunate enough to get, I was going to say, more and more senior positions. I mean positions with more and more responsibility and accountability, which doesn't always mean senior. And actually, of course, then became more and more interested in how leaders get developed, which led me to where I am now at the Institute of Leadership.
Amazing. And what an amazing journey. So rich. So since you are, and we've talked before, and we know that leadership is one of our main interests. So if I could start with that, what do you think are the trends in leadership going forward?
Oh, okay. There are probably lots of practical ones. Issues like technologies, and we can't have any conversation without mentioning the letters A and I, because that's all about this. But actually, technology generally and how it's applied. I think if we think more about the psychological trends going forward, there will be two for me. I think one of them is leadership as learning. And it's interesting. Ed Monk, who's the chief exec of the Learning and Performance Institute, has coined this term learnership, which I think sums it up beautifully, actually. And Ed talks about, as you and I have often talked about, the need for leaders and people in leadership positions to be learning all the time in order even to keep up, let alone to get ahead of the curve. And it's funny because our the Institute of Leadership's lapel badge for members and fellows is just a square badge with an L on it. And somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, is that your L plate, John?" Meaning, of course, learner driver. And I said, and immediately said, yes, of course, because leaders should always be learning, which is quite a trite thing to say, and nevertheless very true. So I think leadership as learning, constantly learning. And then the second thing is leadership as, I suppose, stewardship would be the word I would use, which is, and I had to look this up a little while ago, a definition of stewardship, and it says the careful and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care, whether that's people or organizational capital or goodwill or whatever. And I come across often people in leadership positions who forget that they don't own that position. They are actually looking after that position for whoever comes next. And I think that stewardship principle will be an increasing trend in the future. And both of those, leadership as learning and as stewardship, neither of them is new in the sense of, oh, this was recently invented. I think it's just more recently become recognized that each of them will be significant trends in the way leaders need to think in future.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I had not heard the concept of learnership before. This sounds amazing, actually.
Well, yeah, and I'd be very happy, actually. We can facilitate a chat with Ed Monk sometime, because I'm sure that you and he would get on really well, actually. And Ed is full of really interesting stuff about leadership and learning.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. And I know we jumped ahead, and because as you and I know, we've got long-term relationship with the Institute of Leadership, but there might be people out there who are watching or listening and who might not be familiar with the Institute of Leadership. How would you like to introduce it to them?
Yeah, without sounding like an advert, which of course nobody wants to hear, I think probably. I'd say three things really. One is that we think of us as an organization that tries to help more people become better leaders more of the time. It's that simple, really. And we do that. We try to operate as the hub of a community of leadership practice. And we do that by providing some content for the community members, whether it's thought leadership white papers, webinars, podcasts like this one, things like that. Connections between the community members, and then collaborating with other communities, because nobody has a monopoly on leadership, on thought leadership. And actually, the more people we engage with in that community of practice, the more good ideas get shared around.
Yes. And if you don't mind me adding, and because I've been a member since, I think, 2017.
Excellent.
Quite many years now. I've stayed, and I've really seen amazing value. And as you know, I've participated in many of your events.
Indeed.
One thing that I love about all of the people that I've had the honor and pleasure to meet at the Institute of Leadership, and this might sound weird, is the lack of arrogance, which I find it fascinating. There's something, you service the industry of leadership in such a humble way. And it makes I don't just feel as a member of the Institute, I feel it's part of the family.
It's really interesting you say that, because when anybody posts on LinkedIn that they're pleased to have become a fellow, for example, of the Institute, I always write "Welcome to the family," because I want it to feel like that, really. And it's quite challenging, actually, because the concept of, for example, of humble leadership and things like this. I remember somebody saying to me once, the problem with humility is the moment you think you've got it, you've lost it.
Yeah.
So
it's so true.
Excuse me. It's difficult from the Institute's perspective to say we try to be humble, because actually we just try to add value. And we'd like to do it in a way which is, not just accessible, personable and human. And I guess, that's one of the reasons why so many people remain members of the Institute for as long as they do, which is great.
Absolutely. Well, you've definitely achieved that.
Oh, well, fingers crossed it carries on now.
Yeah. So how do you see the role of the Institute of Leadership shaping the landscape of leadership?
Yeah, in a couple of ways. I'm a Gemini, so there's always two answers to absolutely everything, really. I think, and actually this, I have lots of conversations about this alongside other organizations, because of course we are only one of the organizations endeavoring to do this. Well, I think we can help to legitimize leadership as a career journey, like law or accountancy or medicine. And what I mean by that is, if I wanted a lawyer or accountant or doctor, I would seek somebody who had not merely qualifications and not merely experience, but something more than that, who was part of a community of practice, who was demonstrably engaged in bettering themselves at what they do all the time. Whereas with leadership positions, we tend to throw people into them sometimes for almost no reason, or for an erroneous reason. The classic example is sales managers. The best salesperson in a team, we make them sales manager because they perform better than the others. Whereas actually, of course, the functions are completely different. And there's a great piece of work. I think Zenger and Folkman did a piece of research back in 2012 or 2014 that Harvard Business Review reported on. They said the average age of a manager around the world is about 30. The average age at which they get their first leadership development is around 40.
Wow.
And you just think, wow, even if that is a bit exaggerated, that's still a huge gap. So we put people into positions of responsibility and accountability, and then give them the tools and techniques later.
Absolutely.
And it should be the other way around, of course.
Yeah, no, I see that all the time, and it's the paradox of leadership. You get famous because of your technical skills, promoted, and then, Monday morning suddenly you have, hey, here is a team. Now you can lead them, manage them, and then,
absolutely.
You need leadership development.
Yes, we forgot about that. Yeah. And interestingly, that's particularly the case in very technical professions.
Yes,
things like project management, for example, or engineering professions, or indeed medicine and law. Leadership competencies are not inculcated at the early stages of professional development. So that's one of the things we try to legitimize leadership. The other thing that we see the Institute helping to do is to shorten the learning curve that people require on their leadership journey by sharing what we uncover about leadership with as many people as possible. You'll have heard me say before, Maria, we are what we share. It's one of my many mottos. It's the one I repeat the most, I think, really, because the wisdom of leadership resides in the leadership community of practice, not in any individual or organization. So the more that we share, the more wisdom actually can be utilized by more people. So that's part of the role that I see the Institute playing.
So I've let you off the hook up to now for the last 10 minutes or so. So I'm going to put the spotlight on you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So what's a moment in your leadership journey, your personal leadership journey, that felt insignificant at the time, but in hindsight shaped who you are today?
Yeah. This would... I almost remember this because it was in a meeting, and I was very, very privileged to be work shadowing a director at the Bank of England for a week, which was great. There was many years ago, and I was in this meeting of a number of senior people at the Bank of England around this big oak table in a wood-panelled room and all of that, sort of exactly as you would have expected. And I was keeping very, very quiet. And the director who I was work shadowing, during the course of the discussion, had explained who I was. I was there as his shadow for a week and stuff like this. And during the course of the discussion, a question came up, and he turned to me and said, "What do you think, John?" And of course, I'm in a room full of all these incredibly important people in the Bank of England, thinking I really don't want to say anything here at all. So I had a question to ask, and I don't even remember what the question was. It would, though, have firmly fallen into the category of stupid questions. and the sort of questions that nobody wants to ask because they don't want to look like an idiot. And I thought, I will look like an idiot if I don't ask this. So, okay, I'll just ask it. Things that, and of course, as so often happens in those situations, it turned out to be a question not only that was useful in the discussion, lots of other people wanted to ask it and didn't want to show themselves as ignorant because I was allowed to be. So for me, initially it was a bit, not entirely insignificant, but it wasn't something that I would have thought, oh gosh, this is really important. What it taught me was asking questions, and particularly the stupid questions, the questions that nobody thinks ought to be asked, is a really important leadership competency. Nowadays, we would call it curiosity.
Yes.
Because that's a much more, complimentary term than asking stupid questions, really. But I think that that absolutely has shaped the way that I have engaged with people since then, really. And this was 25, 30 years ago, something like that. And asking the questions that nobody else will ask or that people don't want to ask because they think they look silly and stuff.
And I guess it takes courage as well. And then the system needs to have enough psychological safety for you or whoever to feel, oh, okay, I can ask this seemingly stupid question. So
Yep. And interestingly, that idea of having sufficient psychological safety in both the system and the situation to be able to ask that, inverted commas, stupid question, is something that I think leadership figures should try to create all the time. We should create an atmosphere where people can say, I don't understand this. Can you just explain that sort of stuff?
Yeah. What's a belief about leadership that you've completely changed your mind about over the years?
Oh, the clear and obvious answer for me on this one is I used to think in what I would call my early days as a leader, and I use the word in the most advised and ironic way possible. I used to think that leadership meant being in charge. And I'm quite sure that I am not alone in that, because I've met loads of people who still think that leadership means being in charge. That one took rather longer than I had hoped to be reversed, because I sort of hung on to that as a sort of almost to legitimize the uncertainty and the imposter syndrome that I was feeling about being in a leadership position. Okay, look, nevertheless, I'm in charge. At least that satisfies why I feel so unhappy about being in charge.
Yeah.
However, eventually it became clear to me that the classic organization chart, like the pyramid, should be the other way up. Because actually, it doesn't really matter whether we call it, servant leadership or situational leadership, whatever it is. The people who are most important in the organization are the ones who interact with the customer, and everybody else serves to support them. And actually, the leadership figures at every layer in that org chart should be supporting those people who on a normal chart are below them, and on a rational chart are actually above them. So that belief that I was in charge took some time to be dismantled, and nevertheless was thoroughly, in the end, dismantled.
Yeah, I totally get that. I totally get that. In your rich journey that you described to us, what's a challenge that you faced that when you handled it in a way that maybe even surprised yourself? Do you have such a challenge?
Oh, yes. I was a civil servant for about 7 or 8 years during my career. And the particular challenge that I faced in one of the roles that I had was transforming a service from being a purely public sector service to one that was driven by the private sector. And it involved moving people around and all sorts of stuff. And of course, that sort of thing, for very good reason, because people are not just pawns on a chessboard, that sort of thing takes time. And I am not, by anybody's standards, a patient person. I'm not very good at doing, patience at all, really. And learned to be patient. And in actual fact, I suppose two things about the way that worked surprised me. First of all, it took me about 2.5 years to achieve what I wanted to achieve, which for me is like 10 lifetimes or something like that. It's just outrageous timeline for me. And I managed to go through that, to maintain momentum and commitment and all the way through that. The things I learned were when to be patient and when to be impatient, or at least when to simulate impatience if I needed to. And that was it was a really hard-won lesson, actually, that the need to sometimes look as though I've had enough of this, and actually only to do it in the right places.
Yeah.
So I surprised myself by the patience that I allowed myself during that long process.
And I like the way you described it. It's about that dimmer switch. When I do I need to have more of this or less? It's not just an on-off switch, but rather a dimmer switch. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that description of it as a dimmer switch. Yeah.
What's a mistake you made that, and here I'm assuming you made a mistake, that looking back, you are secretly glad that it happened?
Well, I first of all, I defer to nobody in the number of mistakes that I've made in my career. I could spend years talking about them. And I actually used to do a session when I do quite a lot of guest lecturing at universities and things. And one of the most popular sessions that I do is how I got it wrong. And I just iterate a number of my attempts at being a successful person in business and how they all went wrong. And the students, of course, like that because it's important for them, I guess, to understand stuff doesn't always go well. The mistake, I think, the mistake about which I'm secretly glad, I moved from the Northeast to London to run an investment agency. And this was in the 3-year run-up to the Olympic and Paralympic Games, actually, in London. It's about 2009. And I had been coming to London for a long, long time, for many, many years, as a visitor, and sometimes as often as twice a week, because I'd been in stockbroking, I'd done loads of business with clients in London, and I thought I knew London. Mm-hmm. And I descended onto this job and took up this job and assumed that I had no need to build a network because I already know London. I know London. I know the city of London. I know big companies in London. I know important people in London. I can get by with this job. I can do it well, without realizing that actually London is different from anywhere else in the country. Mm-hmm. And because of that, and this is not an advert for London, it's actually almost the opposite, because the London's economy is bigger than some global economies, Switzerland or Argentina or whatever. And it is so dense that one needs to have a network in order to be able to make an impression in London. And I arrived thinking I didn't need that. And it taught me such an important lesson. And I was really, really glad that I learned that lesson. And the lesson was twofold. One needs a network because nothing is created by ourselves alone. Secondly, it's not that hard to build a network if one approaches it from I have something to give rather than I want to take something. And I used to run, for example, what I called like-minded people dinners. Every month it was in Canary Wharf, actually, I would get about 12 people around a table, and there would be 3 or 4 of us who were there every month. And all of the others I would just invite because I thought they would be useful to each other. And it was really good because, of course, that helped me build my network, and it helped them to network usefully as well. So I didn't, it didn't make me anybody's best friend or anything. However, it enabled me to build the network I needed to do my job, and it helped me to become useful to other people. And for me, that networking was very beneficial for everybody concerned. So really, it was a mistake in assuming things. That any assumption is the mother of all bad things that happen, really, I think. And then I'm glad it happened because I learned a lot from it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And when you said network, I'm thinking because of my introverted nature, which I know
Hmm.
not always
Hmm.
obvious. I have made the same mistake and very often underestimated the importance of building and creating a network.
Yeah, and I used to do training sessions for people. I worked in a bank at Santander for a while. I used to do some training sessions for people there, and I did as a consultant on how to network and essentially how to make networking fun and pleasurable to do. Because I know for many people it's awful. You stand in a room full of people you don't know, wishing somebody would talk to you, holding onto a cold cup of coffee that you've had for half an hour and looking at your phone so you don't look as though like a wallflower and stuff like this. Whereas actually there are ways to network which are both pleasant for all parties and actually useful as well. So yeah, that's another, I guess, important competency that can be shared.
100%. I think you've just described me there with a cup of coffee. If we're not going to do this, so don't worry. If someone were to shadow you for a week, what would they learn about leadership that they wouldn't get from a book?
I would have to say how messy it is. Really?
Okay. In what way?
Yeah, because if we think about the way that I'll say teach, the way that we teach leadership, the way that we educate people about leadership and stuff like this. Yeah. There are models, there are frameworks, there are protocols, there's all sorts. There are even algorithms now that will say in any given situation, this is how leadership would behave. And of course, in different situations, it might differ. That's a simple approach to leadership, and it's quite useful to have frameworks, because in the same way as it's useful to have all buildings will need a frame and some doors and some windows, but actually the detail is very, very different. And the challenge of leadership that I think people would learn when they do it rather than when they hear about it or when they're taught about it is its complexity. And I love, somebody said to me, I love this simple definition of the difference between complicated and complex. And they said, with something that's complicated, you can predict the outcome from the inputs. So here's a kit that makes a car. It's really complicated. However, if you follow the instructions perfectly, you'll get a car. Okay, that's complicated. Something that's complex, you cannot predict the outcome from the inputs.
Okay.
So the weather, for example, how long have we been trying to predict what the weather's going to do next? It's a complex system. People are complex.
Wow.
So we cannot predict in any given situation what the response will be from a group of people, because we are different every single time we meet somebody. They are different. Situations are different. What is that old Zen proverb? The river is different. You can't step into the river, the same river twice, I think. Yeah, because it flows. It's different every time and stuff like that. So leadership is messy, and it requires us to have confidence that actually we're capable of dealing with that complexity, and competence in the stable factors. And there are some stable factors. There are systems within which we work. There are rules, for example, about how we're allowed to treat people and stuff like that. So confidence and competence are the two things I would hope people would get from how messy it is.
Yeah.
Really. And
love it.
I will also say, because this is part of that competence thing. It is true that whatever plans we make will not go as planned. They said in the military, every strategy falls apart as soon as the first shot is fired and stuff like this. And nevertheless, the other military saying that I like is, time spent in reconnaissance is seldom wasted.
Yes.
Really. And I like that a lot, because we cannot predict the outcome. We can prepare for the outcome.
True.
Prediction. Yeah, and this is why work shadowing is so good, actually, because it helps people, A, to see how somebody deals with complexity, and B, to start practicing their own approach to it.
Yeah. And again, so interesting. I love the leadership is messy. I had never thought about the difference between complicated and complex. And it reminds me of, I think it's Heifetz, and I don't remember the other authors. They distinguished between technical and adaptive change. Technical, it's the complicated. It's exactly what you said. It's when you know the answer. Adaptive change is when you don't have a footprint. So flying a plane is complicated, but we know how to.
Yes.
While COVID was an adaptive change. The next one. Let's hope we don't have a next one, but. So it's very, very interesting. Thank you for sharing those.
Interesting, actually, when you mentioned flying a plane there, in the aviation industry, they have this thing about complicated, complex. You're right, flying a plane is complicated. I can't do it for sure. If something goes wrong, for example, they fly into a storm or something like this, or something catastrophic happens with the electrics or the avionics, it may become complex.
Exactly.
Okay. And the aviation industry has a 3-phase program for how to deal with that. And aviate, navigate, communicate. And in response to something has just gone wrong, first of all, are we still flying? Aviate. Are we still flying? Okay. Secondly, navigate. Where are we flying? Are we going in the right direction? Are we the right way up? Stuff like that. And thirdly, communicate. Okay, we're still flying. We're going in the right direction. We need to tell people about it, just in case somebody else is liable to arrive in the same place as us. And I like that as the one of the what's the word? Predictable bases that we can use, one of the algorithms, if you like, that we can use to start to respond to a complex situation.
This is brilliant stuff. Thank you so much. So as we approach the end of this conversation, what's a piece of leadership advice you hope the next generations completely ignore?
Because I get off. Thank you for asking this. I get asked often, what's the best piece of advice you've ever had? And I say, I don't know, because there are lots of good pieces of advice, loads and loads of them. I know exactly what is the worst piece of advice I've ever had. And actually, it is often provided to leadership figures, and that is hurry up. Yeah, because we talk about pace, we talk about failing fast, we talk about let's get some urgency into this. Of course, however, hurry up is not quite the same. And I think the subtleties of maintaining pace or achieving urgency or even failing fast, the subtleties and nuances of those concepts are reduced to and regressed almost to simply hurry up in the minds of many people. And hurry up is not what we want to see from leadership figures. And pace, I like the idea of pace actually as the antidote to hurry, because I coach marathon runners very often, and I say to them, look, you can run as fast as you can and not very far. But if you achieve a pace that allows you to finish that marathon in about the time and with the feeling that you want, then that's the pace you should aim for, even if somebody else is going faster. Forget that. Your key is to maintain pace. And I think that's, in a way, is a much better piece of advice than hurry up. So if anybody ever says to the next generation, get a move on, they should ignore it completely.
Yeah, I love that. Also because pace sounds more like a conscious choice. So it's by design, while hurry up, it's almost like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Absolutely, driven by externalities.
Exactly. Yeah. So, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I think, what would you say? Have you survived the grilling? It wasn't that bad, was it?
I've had 14 glasses of water and stuff like that. No, this has been a great conversation. And it's, as usual, with our conversations and with good conversations, there's such a lot more that we could say.
I know, yeah.
Really, yeah.
Go on for another hour.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what is it? In a sense, it's very good, because we always want people to go away thinking, actually, I could listen to more of that, because that's how I like to feel.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you so much, John.
Wow.
Well, I'll definitely see you in one of the Institute of Leadership events for sure.
Indeed, very soon. And thank you very much, Maria, for the opportunity to chat, and particularly to give answers rather than to ask questions, because it's something that I don't normally get to do, and I enjoy this.
I really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much, John.
My great pleasure. Thank you, Maria.